Welcome to the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast.
Well, then Perez has got the better of it, and he looks to get the better of Schmeichel, and he's done it.
Wilshire's going to fall here for Alexis.
Henri, chance, goal!
This is Mean Lean from arsenalvision.co.uk. She wore a yellow ribbon in the merry month of May, and when I asked why she wore the ribbon, said it's for the Arsenal fans going to Wembley again. We've beaten Reading to play in the FA Cup final against Aston Villa. Was a slight shock today, but going back to the Arsenal match, yeah, it was a game I didn't expect, and that's my own fault. I'm really naive and been here before, and I'm sure everyone would have been screaming at me pre-match when I was a little confident of getting through to the final. The fact that we won 8 games in a row in the Premier League, the fact that Reading were languishing in, where were they? Mid-table, haven't won for 5 games. Come on, it was a walk in the park. Surely this time, I know they say one-off games and stuff, but this isn't going to be a tight game. We're going to destroy them. They can't cope with us. But I don't know what on earth they had for breakfast that morning, but they flew out the traps like nobody's business. And we couldn't settle for a little while. And the game was a much tighter game than I thought it would be. But before anything else, I've got to say, I've got to give plenty of credit to Reading for their performance, because I know for a fact that a lot of the fans didn't expect anything like that before the kick-off. Reading around the blogs and forums for the Reading sites, more often than not, they were expecting to get beaten good and proper. And it didn't turn out that way, did it? But we rode our luck in patches. After all said and done, we were the better team on the day. We did create the better chances. And we managed to get the win, even though the winning goal by Alexis was a tad fortunate, to say the least. Did feel a little bit sorry for the goalkeeper. Not that sorry, really, because that's life, isn't it, really? If it was our goalkeeper in the cup final against, say, Birmingham, I don't think people would be too upset about it. So, yes, Aston Villa overcame Liverpool with a really good performance, I thought, today. You know, credit where credit is due. Tim Sherwood is making them into a really good, decent little side he's got there. Really confident on the ball, and they were creating chances. And they were taking the game to Liverpool. They weren't just sitting back and trying to hit on the break, but they were actually taking the game to Liverpool, and they deserved the win, I thought. Maybe I'm biased. I probably am, but yeah, Aston Villa in the final, and it is by no means a foregone conclusion. Hull City last season, Wigan last season, Reading this season tells you all you need to know about the final. I'm not carrying any chickens or any eggs hatching and things like that. So, yeah, it's going to be a 50-50. Whoever turns up on the day with a performance good enough to win will win. Yeah, we shall see what happens then. But anyway, it's just James and Paul. I say just. They're not just. They're fantastic voices on the podcast. And but there's no Elliot today. He couldn't make it. So it's just a twosome. I'm going to let them talk about the game. And back after the next game, which is Chelsea at the Emirates. Yeah, it should be interesting. But it doesn't really matter anymore. We just have to beat them for the sake of beating them. Yeah, enjoy the podcast. Back again soon.
Welcome to the Arsenal Vision podcast. In the wake of our victorious victory over Reading in the FA Cup semi-final, this is Poznan in my pants standing in for Elliot, who's decided to go on a 2 or 3 day bender this week. Joining me today is Gooner Fanatic 49, James Seago, as always, ever present in our midfield.
Hello.
Welcome, James. How you doing?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing great.
I'm just sort of catching the last of the Floridian rays before heading back to the UC.
Yeah, you're in the States this week, aren't you?
I am indeed stateside. I'm on the other side of the pond.
Yes, very disorienting, but welcome to our humble abode.
Yes, thank you.
And that's just one of our 50 states.
How remarkable.
Isn't it?
I must explore further in the near future.
You must.
Yes.
Watch out for the alligators.
Yes, indeed.
Right, so we've got some football to talk about. So, let me give you a little historical context, something we all know. Apparently, that this will be our 40th appearance for the North London club, Arsenal in the Wembley final, making us with 19 FA Cup finals, winning 11 of them so far. If we win the final, that'll be our 12th victory, and Arsenal and Arsene Wenger himself will have got 6 of them. So pretty big historic ground we're heading into here. So, what was your general feeling on the game yesterday? Maybe we've got plenty to work through. There was a lot of guessing in terms of lineup beforehand, as there always is. Let's talk a little bit about the lineup. What were how did you feel about this lineup? How did it match against your thoughts? What were your biggest surprises?
Well, there was a lot of furore just before kickoff, wasn't there, regarding the lineup?
Yeah.
The obvious change was Ospina to Szczesny. We all know Szczesny's the cup keeper. Whether that remains for the final is yet to be seen. But there was certainly no surprise from any section of the fans in that regard. The major issue really lay with the alteration to the 2 fullbacks. So we had Debuchy, a player that's been out for a significant period of time, and although has been deemed somewhat fit, aka has been in full first team training for a few weeks now, I don't think he's got much match practice under his belt, even sort of with regards to the under-21 setup. So it was a bit of a surprise seeing him come in for Hector, although I had mentioned, although not sort of on the Twitter sphere, so I have no proof of such, I did feel that the fullbacks was an area whereby Arsene was most likely to bring in changes, mostly because those are the positions in previous FA Cup fixtures that we've seen the most sort of change take place to. And also, I think a lot of it was down to trying to bring Gibbs into the left-back position ahead of Nacho. Since, let's not forget, I know that Nacho has gained a lot of affection from the fans now, and he has certainly been the stronger of the 2 players this season and is certainly the first choice. For long periods of this season, there wasn't much to be made between the 2 of them, and a lot of Nacho's progression, outside of the improvements he's made since playing centre-back, a lot of it's come to also the game time he's been given. And I think, the benefits of having a large squad is to be able to have the option of bringing in someone like Kieran, who I'm sure many fans at the beginning of the season would probably have attested was probably was the more likely of the 2 to actually cement his place in the first team. So, it's a sign of the strength of the squad, but unfortunately in a big game like this, not having played as consistently as Nacho sort of came to fruition throughout that match. I'd say the 2 fullbacks, certainly for the full 90, look to be the 2 of the weaker players on the field. And, probably in addition to Danny, who came in for Giroud, again, and not a particularly surprising alteration. Again, we've got to look at the importance of keeping players fit, not overplaying certain individuals, but Danny had come in for the game against Old Trafford. I don't think purely for sentimental reasons. I think obviously the slight amount of pace that he brings in, especially when we're playing Ramsey out on the right, to add more pace to the side was probably in Arsene's thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, what did you think about that lineup as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, on your point on the fullbacks, the other surprising thing was that neither even Bellerin or Chambers was on the bench, if I remember correctly.
Right. No, that was actually the biggest surprise for sure.
Yeah, I mean, of the 2 fullbacks, I thought, we'll get to the game itself, I thought Debuchy was at least reasonable. I thought Gibbs, really of the 2 of them, was really surprisingly the slower starter. It really took him a long time to find his groove in the game, if he ever really found it. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But the fact that Debuchy hadn't played for the under-21s and hadn't played in such a long time, and both right backs weren't even on the bench, that surprised me. To be honest, I did guess the back 4. As you say, there was a lot of debate, but it was, you could have gone a few ways, but it wasn't too surprising. But no right fullback backup on. I guess Gabriel or somebody would have been it, but that surprised me. So your thoughts?
Just quickly on that as well. I mean, because this was a big talking point before the game, especially with regards to the fullbacks. And I think Arsene's thinking for the most part was that he was really desperate to bring Gibbs in. And, we do have to look at it. I know it's an FA Cup semi-final, but we were playing Reading. So you would think from, naturally we wouldn't be tested as much defensively as we would, say against, like the likes of the Liverpools or the Chelseas, etc., Premier League sides in general. And as we've seen throughout the season, Arsene likes to have that combination of one more marauding left back with the pace that Kieran has, and one more sort of defensive minded in a Debussy or perhaps even say a Chambers. So in general, I think going into the I think Debussy still probably, when fully fit, is our best right back, certainly our most experienced. And maybe it's one of those things where, due to his injury, people have somewhat, he's lost some of his luster, and maybe he's gone down slightly in the way in which fans deem his qualities. But I do still think it's surprising, especially to know that you're going to have to play him for a full 120 minutes if it did go to extra time, which it did, given the lack of match practice he's had.
Yeah, I mean, I can see, to your point, maybe the two fullbacks that were perfect for playing Reading, a big physical team who are planning to put in crosses. I'd make the point that maybe Debussy is the right player for right back, all things being equal. And Monreal, now with his ruggedness and having played centre back, was probably the stronger left back, just from a defensive, physical, aggressive, high energy Reading standpoint. So that's the one argument I can see for Monreal, but I wasn't surprised with the back four. When we look at the rest of the lineup, I guess the two biggest discussion points, I expected some kind of a surprise. It turned out to be Welbeck at centre forward. I was hopeful of Theo, but I knew that was a long shot. And then, not maybe astonishing, but certainly significant, Ramsey starting from the right. What were your thoughts on that before the match? And then let's get into the game itself. What were your thoughts before the match? And then how do you think those positions played out?
Again, I wasn't that surprised before the match. It's the formation that we've used these last couple of games. It was particularly successful against Liverpool, where we played an extremely impressive pressing game, which Ramsey certainly contributed to. I think, obviously, in Wenger's thinking is that he wants to bring his best players into the starting 11, and with Cazorla being fit and Özil playing the way he is, of course, and being the quality that he possesses, Ramsey sort of having to be shunted out to the right in order to get into the starting lineup at the moment. I think obviously long term you were definitely going to see Ramsey playing more centrally. Whether that in a game like against Reading, where we really, and actually quite importantly, had a right back in the ilk of Debussy, who doesn't get forward and doesn't display the kind of width that someone like a Bellerin does. He doesn't really give Ramsey the opportunity to come infield as much as he'd like.
And certainly not at the moment when he's not match fit and game fit. I mean, Debussy can get forward and he can whip in crosses, but it was never likely he was going to be able to do that for 90 minutes. And when you think we had no right back fullbacks and that this could go to 120 minutes, we were really asking a lot of Debussy and Ramsey on the right wing, with, as you're talking, Ramsey swinging into the centre pretty often. So Debussy having to cover quite a lot of ground, and then the thoughts of him being an attacking fullback, it was a big ask.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, but then again, I think Arsene probably gets a little too much criticism with regards to that selection. Even against Burnley, I think people look towards that Ramsey choice as being a reason why we weren't able to create as much in the final third. But ultimately, I think these types of games where Reading were really up for this game. I think sometimes you can look at a lower league opposition like this, and either they're kind of overawed by the occasion of an FA Cup semi-final, and they do just genuinely get completely outplayed by a bigger team, or they come in sort of guns out and really set up staunchly in the way that they did, make it really difficult no matter the type of opposition you're playing.
Yeah.
And naturally, even if a Theo Walcott, a naturally very quick wide player who then obviously has the ability to cut in and make runs, I think even a player of his ilk throughout that game would have struggled, certainly in the full 90 minutes. I just think it's a very difficult game for any of the attackers to really sort of imprint their mark upon a match that kind of plays out in the way that it did. And, frankly, one thing I know, so obviously Burnley, Ramsey was the player that ended up getting the winning goal. And I think he had that excellent opportunity where he kind of, was through with the goalie and then hit the post when he, albeit from a tight angle, should have scored. But I think even for the first Sanchez goal, Ramsey was actually out on the left, and we kind of overloaded the left-hand side of the play. So Ramsey picked up the ball on the left. Gibbs was then able to cut in slightly, and that kind of fashioned out a slight bit of space for Alexis that Özil managed to pick out superbly. A little bit of that interchanging, the relationships that those midfielders build, I think that certainly played a part. But I do think there's strong arguments to be made, no doubt, that a more natural wide player, especially given that Debussy was playing on the right, may have been more suited. But I think come what may, whoever had played, the game wouldn't have shaped out all that differently because Reading really did make it very difficult for us.
Yeah, so let me make the Reading case a little bit because we've all heard the narrative, lucky Arsenal, unlucky Reading, or alternatively, this is a game Arsenal should have just blown through because they're in great form, top of the Premier League, and Reading are struggling somewhere in the middle of the Championship. I mean, that's good, and it's an interesting narrative, and it's part of what makes the FA Cup great and wonderful and stuff. But the other side of our brain, now that we're talking about it rationally, knows that this is an FA Cup semi-final. For Reading, this is their final, that they've been planning on this, that Steve Clarke is planning to make his name off this, that their approach to the game is more straightforward, simpler, more about energy, and lends itself to energy. This was always going to be a tough match. I mean, I went into it feeling really good and thinking Arsenal would knock 7 bags of shit out of Reading. But, as soon as the game starts, you're reminded, whether it's Hull or Wigan, there's a reason these guys get to the semi-finals and finals and win the damn thing against the Cities, the Chelseas, the Uniteds, and almost the Arsenals. It's because they're under no illusions what they need to do in that match. They need to give it absolutely everything. And for Arsenal, it's a much more complex equation. We've got to give it everything while being technical, while flowing, while managing the emotions of it, while knowing it's a 90-minute and 120-minute game. It's a very, very even competition in which Arsenal will have a little bit of the upper hand, but luck is going to play a huge role in it. And, that's how it sets up. Reading, I don't know if it was the hooped shirts, but those Reading guys, they were fecking enormous. They were huge. I mean, Hector was literally huge, and the other 9 looked massive on that field. And their approach was, they weren't dirty, I don't think, but they were very, very physical and knocking us about all over the place. So this was a classic encounter in the FA Cup. And did you have a chance to look at it a second time, by the way?
The full match, unfortunately not. I mean, I just saw sort of the extended highlights.
Yeah, because I think what everybody will find, I did, is second time round with less nerves. We played like we always discover. We played pretty well. So did Reading, but we played pretty well. So, that's the Reading case. So, given that's who we're playing against, how did you feel we played in the entirety of the game? You've begun to talk a little bit, given the Ramsey dynamic, and to talk in Ramsey's, to make the Ramsey case for why he should have been on the field at the same time as Cazorla, and I think you touched on it. He had 2 open chances in front of goal that were classic Ramsey, that had he put those away, there'd be absolutely no discussion about why he was on the field.
Absolutely. I mean, again, just very briefly adding to your point, is that as you say, it's really no coincidence that we regularly see the likes of these Wiggins, who, don't forget, beat Man City before taking us to penalties in the semi-final and facing a Reading in the semis, is that cup sets take place very frequently in the FA Cup. And that's because of the emotion involved and the amount of passion and the way in which these lower teams are able to sort of up their game and the approach that they're able to take against the bigger side. So naturally, in a game like this, I think it was going to always be a game where there weren't going to be too many chances to be fashioned out. We were never we weren't tested all that much defensively. Reading didn't really have many fantastic opportunities. They had a couple on the counter. There was one quite early on where I wouldn't know who it was. Had a decent strike from distance, but straight on the edge of the box with quite a lot of space, and he hit it straight at Szczesny. And obviously the goal that they scored. But that aside, Reading were always going to be living off scraps. I think Mackie was extremely good for them, holding up the play and trying to start up any counters. But naturally, it was always going to be a game that panned out in a similar way to what it did, unless, say, we managed to hold on to that one goal lead for a little bit longer, and then later on in the game, Reading might have got a little bit more desperate to score an equaliser, which might have opened it up ever so more for within, say, the final 10 minutes or so. But that being said, I think we had a lot of good playing, a lot of technical players in the final third that were able to keep possession of the ball. Especially, it was extremely tight in that final third. It was very difficult to find ways in behind the back line, and it's really a reason why I'm not a big proponent of having, say, a Theo Walcott having started ahead of Ramsey on the right. Maybe there's more arguments for Giroud to have started and Welbeck play out on the right, but I just don't think there was really much space. There was so few opportunities for us to get in behind that Reading back line. We saw it happen with Sanchez, but a lot of that was down to the way in which Ramsey, as I've touched upon and you touched upon earlier, came into the left and fashioned out the smallness of space for Özil to find that pinpoint pass in between a whole host of Reading players. I mean, even that one time we were able to get through, it was extremely congested in there. So I think for the most part we were good with the ball. We weren't. I don't think we were particularly wasteful with the ball in the final third, but I think just in general, often what we saw was Santi would carry it from deep, and Özil was the main man in that final third that was always looking to make things happen. I mean, he was constantly pushing and probing that Reading defence, and he seemed to be the only player that was really ever going to be able to find those little pockets of spaces and truly get into that Reading defence and look to make things happen.
Yeah, Ozil was great from the get-go, wasn't he? He just stood out. He was the one guy who really knew what he was up to for 90 to 120 minutes. I mean, everybody wanted to do it, but he knew what he was doing, how to get it going. He was turning the screws. He was getting it going. It was always going to be frustrating, in particular that first 45 minutes as a game. And when I looked at it a second time and went looking for who actually played poorly, really, Gibbs had a few fluffed moments and got himself in trouble, but actually mostly managed to bail himself out of his screw-ups with a little help from his colleagues. And to me, the only other disappointing player in the first half was maybe Welbeck, just because he was a bit anonymous. I'm not sure it was particularly his fault. I think he was always going to be frustrated against Reading, the way they were set up, they were organised. But what always gets me about these, the two banks of four you're facing, is that I never think we mix in enough really clever balls over the top to mix it up. We move it one side, we move it the other side, we try and play it through the middle, and then we do it again and again and again. And let's get to the Özil assist to the Sanchez control. But really what that was about was Özil deciding that's enough of that crap. I'm going to play a really clever ball over the top, which we really pretty much hadn't played for the first half. That's kind of what broke that thing open.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a combination between the two that we can hope to see, happen plenty of times in the future as well. It was delightful to see the 77 million pound men combine in such fashion. I think it was a type of goal many Arsenal fans had envisaged when we saw that the two players would be playing together. And it really is a truly exquisite ball. I mean, I do agree. Ideally you want to be playing a decent amount of those balls, and from an Özil type player to find someone who's breaking, who's found that little pocket of space and breaking into the box and behind that Reading back line. But it's such a difficult play overall to execute, because you've got to time the run perfect. The Reading defense or the opposing defense has to make an error, and in this case, I think it was the way in which we overloaded the left. Like with Ramsey coming from the left, Gibbs coming in too, and then cutting inside, so the right back didn't really know to track. Then that gave Alexis the split second to get in behind that man, and for Özil to spot the run immediately and then to execute the pass perfectly.
Yeah, Ozil had a lot of time to make the perfect ball there, didn't he?
He did, but that still didn't take away from how difficult it was to actually
Nope. Yep.
to actually implement. I know, I'm not entirely sure. I think maybe in those scenarios, we don't often tend to see the ball being chipped over the back line when you have those two banks already set up and we're constantly passing it around the edge of the box, going from right to left and constantly trying to fashion out the space. But I think part of that is down to when you're constantly moving the ball around, you're almost waiting for a defensive error to take place before you can actually take advantage of something of that ilk. I did see us on certain, I guess you would refer to them as counterattacks, where we'd have fewer attackers in their half, and we were over the turnover of possession, and Ramsey was often trying to sort of flick the ball over for Sanchez, who often had a couple of defenders around him that he'd have to beat. I just don't. I understand what you're saying, that we'd like to see more of that take place. I just don't know how viable that. I don't know how much you can really account for that going into a game, because it's really just taking advantage of an error that takes place in the defensive system that you.
Yeah, it's really tough to do. There's a reason it's not done very often. But when you got 45 minutes of us having them on the rack against two banks of four, part of the reason, this is just my pet theory, is that not only are they in two banks of four, we get into a little bit of a rut in our thinking, and just to shake it up. But that's just my pet peeve. When I see it done right, every now and then I think, man, that's the kind of thing that really stirs the pot and makes the other even if it doesn't come off, it makes the other 44 minutes of the game, gives them something to think about. It's kind of like the run-in behind that sometimes Theo can pull off, even against those two banks of four. That's why I don't mind seeing Theo in a game like that, because he's going to continue to threaten on the right and give them trouble making those runs. But that's another one of my personal foibles, where people say, oh, well, they're going to sit deep and it doesn't suit Theo. My personal feeling is Theo still gives them conniptions and can still turn them around and still create trouble for them, because he makes those short, sharp runs in behind and they freaking hate it.
Sure.
So, but anyway, Sanchez and that close control. I mean, I think what really made the goal, because when you look at it, it actually goes through the keeper's legs, and I didn't think it did at the time. They talk about Arsenal's luck, and Reading's lack of luck, but everything that happens in a game has some portion of luck in it. What was brilliant for me about Sanchez was the quick close control, the way he chested it down, and the way he got his shot off so quickly. And somebody was talking on Twitter who's done some coaching, who says to his attackers, always shoot near the keeper, because if he misses, it's a goal. And there's a logic to that. If your striker, as a lay person, you're thinking, well, I'll shoot it kind of to one post or the other post, and kind of, you want to get a nice angle and a nice line into the goal. But I think 9 times out of 10, a striker is thinking, I just want to get a good lick on it. I just want to get this low and hard and quick and hit it to one side of the goalkeeper or the other, but really close, and let the chips fall where they may. And when you look at Sanchez's shot against Federici here. It's between his legs. How much did Sanchez know about where it was really going? I don't think they care. I think they hit it low and hard and try and get it off quickly before the keeper has a chance to react.
Yeah, I think the low component to that is certainly probably the most important. If you're gonna keep it in and around the area of the goalie, then keep it low rather than at a height that's easy for him to sort of parry away. Because as soon as you're forcing him to use his feet in that split moment, it's a lot more difficult for the keeper to deal with. Yeah, I think the composure shown from Alexis there was a true sign of his quality, because when that ball first came in and he took that first touch, I thought he was going to take he was going to quickly let it off, but to have that peace of mind to dummy it, shimmy it away from the defender coming across, and then to finish, I wouldn't necessarily with aplomb, because I think there are many finishes where Thierry Henry was fantastic at it, for example, where you see that the goalie's legs are open and you specifically aim for between the two of them.
Yeah.
And I didn't get the sense, just because of the way Sanchez connected with the ball, I think it was more of an instinctive finish.
Get it off quickly.
Get it off quick, and as you said, I mean, it's certainly once you've got the ball low, as long as it's on target, especially from that kind of distance, then I think you let the probabilities play out, and on this occasion it did. And I guess we'll talk about it soon, but in a very different way. But it was very much the same thing that took place for the second goal, but with regards to keeping it low and in around the area of the goal
and playing the odds. And guess what? The whole luck thing, we'll get into it a little bit more, but luck cuts both ways. We had 23 shots on target, or 23 shots, sorry. We had plenty of other opportunities that were non-shots that were opportunities. Sometimes the mass of water building against the wall, that's your luck. Statistically, we were going to have the luck, and that's the way it played out. I think the one area where Reading had some bad luck, really, beyond the flubbed save, was I had a couple of offsides called in the first half and throughout the game, where it was pretty marginal, and maybe they were a little bit actually onside, and attackers should get the benefit of the doubt, but it was certainly pretty close. On the other hand, they weren't dirty in mine, but they were pretty rough and physical. And the ref, what did you think of the reffing? The ref just let it go. I mean, some of his refereeing worked for us in the totality of that game, but in terms of the physicality, which was obviously going to impact on our style of play, our fluency, our control of the game, he basically let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, certainly when you're caught up in the nerves of the game, sometimes it's difficult to really pay too close attention to the way in which the ref is refereeing the fixture. But I did get the impression that he was allowing a pretty physical game to play out, which I think is fair enough in an FA Cup semi-final. I guess it shouldn't really matter necessarily the context of the match, but I don't think it was particularly outrageous refereeing, and I certainly think he was pretty consistent in the way in which he imposed himself. I think the biggest issue you could tend to have is if a referee lets a lot of physical challenges go, but then starts penalising a certain team for very similar challenges that take place later on in the game, partly as a result maybe of making up for an error or just poor refereeing, as we tend to see so frequently. But I think you're definitely right with regard to the offsides, because naturally the way in which Reading set up, they were more likely to create chances on the counter, thereby with the high line that we were playing somewhat, there are going to be more sort of offsides or more offside potential calls to be made for a team that's playing in the way that Reading were. So I think there were definitely a couple of there was one in particular where Pogrebniak, or however you pronounce his name, seemed pretty clean through on goal, and on the replays it did look like he was level. And I guess as a Reading fan, I wonder what your thoughts are on this, but there was that moment, I think, was it in the second half, where the ball was the cross came in from Reading's left and it hit Debusshy's arm. His arm was flailing out to the right. He didn't bring it out to meet the ball, but his arm had remained away from his body, and the ball it was certainly ball to hand, but it wasn't. His arm wasn't close to his. It wasn't right next to his body. So, there are definitely certain referees that would have given it, or potentially would have given it. Whether or not it was the wrong or right decision is a tough one to call, but we were certainly lucky in the sense that it was definitely one of those that
we've seen them given. Yeah. Well, and my quick thought on that was Debussy was actually running. He was actually building up to a sprint. Now, you can't run without moving your arms. So it's not like he was flailing around in a standing position. He was covering back, he was tracking back. But on the other hand, his arm was right out there when it was hit. So we've often seen those given. But it was a natural position for his arm. But certainly breathed a sigh of relief when it wasn't given, because it was well away from his arm, in my opinion, for good reason.
Right. Apologies for the phone that's going off in the background. But yeah, I do agree with that. But obviously, in the moment of the game, it's tough for a referee to sort of like contextualize it in that manner. So. Debussy's he's tracking back and he's in full sprint, so therefore, like, naturally his arms are going to be flailing out slightly, and thus, that's the reason why that's the major reason that's led to the ball to hand. But I don't think it's clear cut. I'm sure many Reading fans would rightfully argue that it should have been a penalty, and I think we can quite comfortably make a case for it not being a penalty. But I think the key really is, when you look back on that game, it was definitely a decision that, as we say, could have been given as a penalty. So there is a certain amount of luck involved that the referee decided not to.
Yeah, I guess my feeling on it was I was quite frustrated by the refereeing to some degree, but I don't think in where it cost us was our fluidity and allowing them to be very physical. But I don't think there were any big decisions against us, and there were some reasonable sized decisions that worked for us. So, and it did let the game flow, and it was a good semi-final. And so, there's always something to say on refereeing. I didn't think it was. It was. I don't know that it was great refereeing, but in the end, I was okay with it. I guess we got the result. So we got a first half goal with 5 minutes to go. We've been doing that quite a lot recently. It probably has a lot to do with why we keep winning. Even if they pegged us back in the second half, it's a 120 minutes in which we were either ahead or level for 120 minutes. You always stand a chance of winning at that point. So we go in at halftime, we come out, and the narrative is they come out fully energized, and we're pretty flat. And when I watched it the second time, I think that was probably right, but maybe the difference wasn't as big as it always seems it is, because that's normally said after they scored their goal. So to talk through that goal, which I think happened around like the 55th minute, they took a throw-in on the right side of our defence, and it basically involved our two full-backs and the goalkeeper. Debussy was marking their guy, who pulled back a very threatening cross into the path of their guy. Was it McCleary, who puts it through our second fullback's legs, and then Szczesny either is unfortunate because of the deflection or could have done better. What are your thoughts on the goal?
So I think, well, it's a funny one because it kind of involves all three changes. At separate points in that move. And I think it also, I can't remember, I think it's Santi, but Debussy doesn't track his man properly for the throw or isn't close enough to his man, and then it comes, there's an overlap that takes place, and I think it's Santi that actually is the player, it may be Santi, maybe it's Coquelin, but I seem to remember it's Cazorla. Anyway, it's another midfielder, at the very least, that is unable to actually stop the cross from coming in.
I think it's Debussy.
Is that
I've watched it a few times, and I could be wrong, but it's Debussy goes to the byline with the guy who crosses it across.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll let the listeners, etc., clarify that point. But either way, Debussy is somewhat at fault. Almost, you'd think a player with Bellerin's pace, for example, that's the immediate kind of comparison that can be made, would probably have been able to intercept that either the ball that is played to the man overlapping or the actual cross itself, wherever Debussy is involved in that move.
Anyway, somebody's at fault.
Sure, but either way, Debussy is at fault at some point in that move, and then Gibbs doesn't close the shot down appropriately, and then it comes to the Szczesny part of the goal. Which is definitely up for debate because he's scrambling across his line, and it does take a really awkward deflection. But that being said, it still does come to where Szczesny has positioned himself. I just think in that split moment, it's easy for us as fans to look at that and say like a De Gea or a top goalie or a Czech or whatever would possibly have still been able to have the nuance about him. To use his feet or to push it out before allowing it to kind of like plop over his head and over the line before he tries to claw it back. It's really difficult just as like as someone who doesn't play goalkeeper, doesn't play regularly, doesn't play in matches regularly. It's really tough to assess from the sidelines. I think it's quite an easy stick with which to beat Szczesny with. I don't think he had a fantastic game. Obviously, he wasn't tested all that much. I don't think his kicking was great. But I think, again, part of that comes down to I didn't think Danny Welbeck had a particularly great game, especially in his hold-up play. And we saw a big change in that when Giroud came on. So maybe that's something we'll come on to slightly later.
Yeah.
But, I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of on the fence with regards to the Szczesny's participation in that goal because I do think because of where it comes, because he's there, and the ball's not coming at a significant amount of pace. You do think, as the eagle-eyed observer that we are, that it's savable. But I do think in that moment when you're rushing across goal, and then the way in which the ball deflects, it does make it that much harder. And it's partly why the ball just about makes it over the line rather than sort of nestling into the back of the net. So.
Yeah. I think their goal line technology is screwed up. Did you see the goal line technology shot of it? That thing looks like 6 feet over the line, but you watch it in live play. I mean, it looks over the line, but the goal line technology makes it look like it's in the back of the net, for God's sake. So, but I think you're spot on with the Szczesny thing. The thing is, I think the last time I played goalkeeper, I was like 7, and it was on tarmac, and there was no diving. But I have watched that goal like probably 25 times, and 24 of those were in ultra slow motion, and I think he should have saved it. But when you play it at full speed, I don't know. And you got to put a little asterisk against it. I was pretty critical of him on that save, and I made the comment about a De Gea or a Courtois or a Lloris making that save. But in Szczesny's defence, that's all very fine and dandy. But he might be fit, but he's not match fit. He's been on the bench for like best part of 4 months, and that's a pure reaction save, and I've been watching it at slow motion. So it felt a little lame, his effort at it, but I think we're all very brave, and you got to give him the benefit of the doubt to some degree. Why was he in that situation scrambling back? And Arsene was certainly pretty sympathetic to him afterwards. So, I think it's one of those, especially having won, you got to say, well, it's pretty brave demanding a reflex save from a guy who hasn't been on a pitch for the last X number of months. So he didn't do much wrong apart from a little extra brilliance there would have gone a long way for us.
Sure. I mean, I think it's somewhat of an easy excuse, though, to say that, from a goalkeeper's point of view, having not played that many matches, that could have played, a big role in the way, had he been playing consecutively, would he have maybe made that save otherwise? We talk a lot about a goalie being able to play a full 90 minutes and for 89 of those minutes to not really be tested, but then to to have the ability about him and the concentration to make that big save when it matters, especially a side like Arsenal is often going to dominate games but might be susceptible to the odd counter attack, and thus like the amount of times that a goalkeeper is brought into action is sort of few and far between. And on the big stage, your quality is tested based on how you perform in whatever game situation you're thrown into. I think that kind of argument could be made more so for players that play outfield, just because you're so actively involved in games for the full 90 minutes. But from a goalkeeper's point of view, a lot of that comes down to concentration, and a lot of that work does take place on the training ground. So the way in which you implement that in a game, and especially given the position of Szczesny at the club at the moment. But that being said, like I do think there are a few too many people that are on either extreme of that argument. There are a lot of people berating Szczesny for that goal that was conceded, and I'm sure there'd be even more if ultimately we had gone on to lose the game. But I don't think it's quite as easy as that.
All right, well, piss off then. Anyway, moving onwards. So they get their equaliser on the 55th minute. Around 60 minutes, Gabriel comes on for Mertesacker. So now we have two very quick centre-backs, very proactive, very on the front foot, which, to be fair, Mertesacker has been the last few games too. Now, there's a couple of really interesting moments in the second half, and maybe in extra time as well, the Pogrebniak moments. He had two of those. One where Koscielny screwed it up, and Pogrebniak's through, and Gabriel saves his ass. And then conversely, the same thing happens, I think, in added time. Gabriel screws it up, running backwards, almost identical. Pogrebniak goes forward, and Koscielny makes it back, and both manage the situation really well and recover really well. But those were critical moments that maybe a quicker pass, a better pass would have had us in real trouble.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was kind of head in pillow for both of those moments, but did manage to watch the replays, and I thought the way in which both players recovered for each particular situation was excellent, and a lot of that came down to the kind of pace that they possess. So you'd imagine that, in a vice versa situation where Koscielny makes the mistake, you'd find it less. You'd give Mertesacker less chance of being able to handle the situation in the way that Gabriel did.
Yeah.
But then again, part of what led to that was, say, for the, I think it was was it the first one that Gabriel gave it away?
No, the other way around. The first one was Koscielny screwed it up.
Well, for the second one, then you wonder would Mertesacker have even?
No, he wouldn't.
He probably wouldn't have made the mistake leading to that. So.
Oh, I see what you mean. Sorry, I thought you were going to say would Mertesacker have got back? I think what we can say is Mertesacker would not have got back for his saving tackle.
Absolutely, no, I agree with that. But then again, because of the kind of calmness and composure that Mertesacker has, does he make the mistake leading up to the second one? But anyway, I do think Gabriel had actually a pretty fantastic game for when he came on. Obviously, he had the header that nearly put us ahead within the 90 minutes. Federici made a great save. And in general, he was aerially extremely dominant. He's clearly a no-nonsense defender. You see him very frequently just sort of booting it out of play whenever there's kind of those 50-50 balls to be won. And I think there's a lot to be said about him. He's still relatively young. Yeah. He's got a lot of the attributes you'd want in a centre-back, similar to Koscielny. He's very good in the air, got a lot of pace. He likes to... There was a moment where he intercepted extremely high up the pitch within Reading's half to quickly start up another move. So I think there's a lot of promise there, and I really like the way in which he was able to come into a semi-final game, a game of that magnitude, given the context of the match as well at 1-1, and to play as well as he did.
Yeah. Spot on. So, one of the things that struck me yesterday, given the game that was in it, was a couple of years ago, the narrative would have been we're shit at set pieces, both taking them and being on the receiving end of them. And yet, pretty much all this season, and this was a game that really illustrated it, Reading came into use their their size, their physicality, their speed, their width, to put in a bunch of crosses and to take advantage of maybe corners, set pieces, and free kicks. And we're as good a team out there for defending against set pieces at the moment, and we do pretty well. We didn't score this time around from set pieces up the other end, but we looked pretty threatening. There was the free kick from Özil, and there were a couple of headers that could have, should have. There was Mertesacker. I thought that goal in the first, I think, 3 minutes. The header from that was a goal. I thought that was in. And I think Mertesacker was sure that was in too. And Federici saved that one, and he saved the Gabriel one, which again, a few inches one way or the other, and it looked like the Gabriel header was in. We're a pretty good set pieces team on the defending and the attacking, which makes us pretty robust against a team like Reading.
Yeah, there was also I think it was in the second half where Cazorla dinked it in from quite a central position, and Mertesacker was completely free, and it hit his back, I think. And in fact, there was another one.
Came off his shoulder.
There was another one that Gabriel had where he was completely free as well, after he'd had the header that was saved, and he skied it. So yeah, I mean, I think that we're far more dominant from set pieces in both regards, and I think a lot of that comes down to just in general. I feel a lot more comfortable now, certainly when defending set pieces. And I think it was even an ongoing joke at the beginning of this season that we couldn't beat the first man. Although I do think part of that was down to that you can see it's often a tactic that we try and implement, and something that I think we're just better at in general, is to dink it into the near post and have runners that come to the front. That's what took place for the Gabriel header that was saved, for example. And set pieces in general are just quite difficult to implement. But the statistic going around is something like we've scored the most set pieces of any team in the Premier League, which I doubt many people would have put money on before the season started.
Absolutely not. And I like those statistics that match up with what you actually see on your eye. And you mentioned Gabriel putting it out for a corner or for a throw in. I mean, that's a pretty safe maneuver at the moment. In previous years, we were just going from the frying pan into the fire. Now, clearly what we need to do is add in defending from throw-ins based on their goal yesterday. But generally, we're pretty darn robust on set pieces, which is a wonderful thing to say. So the game all changed on one substitution. When Giroud came on, the whole way of playing suddenly started to make sense for Arsenal. That was my feeling on it.
Absolutely.
What were your thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, we tend to take a positive light in the light of a victory. But I think the one negative component, especially from an attacking point of view, Reading's industry and compactness aside, was I really thought Danny had a particularly poor game. And a lot of that comes down to the way in which we play now with the pivot up top. It's so integral to have someone who's able to hold up the ball well and retain possession and then link up other players into play. Because although we do like to pass it from the back now and then, we really do like to have that combination of the two. And especially when Ospina plays, we do tend to search for that Giroud ball. And the one thing Giroud is so excellent at, and you really do see it, especially when you go to games and you're there in the flesh, his strength is superb, and his ability to hold on to that ball. I would go so far as to say I don't think there are many players in the world that are as good as he is at it. Although I do, I do limit that by saying that I don't tend to watch most strikers in world football. But still, obviously, one of the benefits of Danny is the way in which the speed he has and the way in which he can get behind. But again, I'm not sure if his movement is as good as it could be given that pace. But that it's a tough combination to implement given the setup we have with using that striker as the focal point. But a lot of things bounced off Danny, and a lot of times he was losing the aerial duels, and that completely changed once Giroud came on. It was a stark difference. I mean, within 30 seconds of coming on, he'd muscled a Reading player off phenomenally, and he sort of brought the ball down exquisitely before then, playing it back into the centre of the pitch. And there were a couple of times, and especially, it's so important as well when we take a lead and we're looking to relieve pressure by having a lot of players behind the ball and Giroud staying up there, and you might have two opposing defenders challenging the ball with him, and he often is the one that comes out on top, manages to hold on to it for that few seconds and wait for a couple of supporting men to surround him and retain possession, and it relieves so much pressure for us. And I think it made a big difference as well in the way in which we attacked at 1-1. And also, even on the ground, you can see the improvements he's made in so many aspects of his game technically. And he's so good at finding those little balls in and around the box. I think he was, there was that little 1-2 he played before and then sort of made that run in for the chance that Özil fed him. And I think there was another one where it was Sanchez. There was a little one-touch play that was played around the box, and then Sanchez had quite a relatively simple ball, I thought, to play through. Maybe it was it back to Giroud who'd ran through and he just overcooked it slightly. But we looked, in general, I thought we just looked a lot more threatening when Giroud was on the field.
It was night and day, and it's tempting to say, though I think we would have struggled against their organisation in the first half regardless. Giroud did come on when the game was getting a little bit more stretched and the legs were getting a little tired. In fact, so much so, he seemed to go full Ronaldo at one stage up in the right corner box. He was doing step overs, he was doing tricks. He was having the time of his life, but it is tempting to think that maybe the one reason we didn't get them into stranglehold in that first half was, Welbeck isn't Giroud. And the other problem was by the fact that Welbeck was somewhat nullified in the first half. Had we had Giroud on as centre forward and Welbeck on the right wing, we would have had the Giroud effect, but we would have also had pace and threat in behind. So I think we lost two things by playing Welbeck at centre forward, but that's all in hindsight. So that took us, obviously, major change when Giroud comes in. Confidence level, style of play, everything seems to ramp up a little bit. With some really good, apart from a couple of brain fart moments, which we pretty much talked about with our centre backs on the one hand screwing it up, on the other hand redeeming themselves. It felt like we really had the game there to be won, and we went after it. Goes to added time one more time. Walcott comes on at around I think it was 10 minutes into added time with about 20 minutes to go. My feeling, obviously I'm a Walcott man, frustrated he's not getting enough minutes so that he can become as brilliant as he was, or starting to be as brilliant as he was when he got injured. He looked pretty dangerous, but probably not in the final part of any move. But he certainly came at it with a lot more pace and livened things up. But it seemed like he never really got into that final position, but was itching to. And that was our final substitution at that point. So we were all in at that point. At 103 minutes, I counted. There's the Ramsey moment where he drives at Federici and Federici has no clue where it is and it pops over the bar. And that was the last time he was to be lucky. At 105, Sanchez scores, pulling in from the left wing, and we get our nose in front. At that stage, looks like we got the thing wrapped up and we kind of play our way out of there. So it really did seem like it was the Giroud move that changed everything else. Everything else seemed to kind of flow from that. Was that your feeling on how the game kind of ramped up and then played out?
Yeah, I think the Giroud change made a huge difference. And obviously that combined with the added energy he was able to bring just from a fitness standpoint. But I think actually the Walcott change, although I was a little flabbergasted by it at first, taking off Coquelin, although at that time we did need the second goal. I was impressed with the way, that he carried the ball. Often a criticism I have is a lot of his pace is often used off the ball. The runs that he makes, there's no denying that there's not many better at doing that than he is. But often he can be somewhat lackluster carrying the ball from deep and actually being able to start counterattacks and continue them on. But I thought he was actually excellent at doing that, which was important, both from an attacking standpoint, but more so when we started defending. His ability to retain possession and use Giroud and then ultimately keep hold of the ball in the final third. And you know what?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. There was a real threat and menace about him with the ball. That's really what I was trying to get to. Although there wasn't a final end product, it did feel like it was another piece of the energy that pushed them back and kind of gave it, while the game was going to and fro, with Giroud and I thought Walcott. Now, I have to say, when we made the substitution, pulled Coquelin off, I was thinking, oh my God, Monaco part 2.
Yes, no,
Oxlade-Chamberlain comes on, scores the goal, but at the price of taking Coquelin off, and we're just wide open at the back.
I was equally fearful, but fortunately without good reason. And one of the things I was most impressed with, actually, was once we'd taken the lead, the way in which he supported Debussy on the right. Who, funnily enough, I thought after I was really concerned about his match fitness to be able to play a full 120 minutes. But I think he actually improved maybe almost as the game went on. Obviously, he wasn't able to get us forward as much, but maybe also the context of the game suited him slightly more, as we had to sit a bit deeper once taking the lead. And of course, the aerial presence that he has over, say, someone like Hector. But yeah, no, I was really impressed with the way that Walcott was tracking back a lot. He was providing a lot of support on that right. He was really putting in a strong defensive shift. Something about him that I certainly tend to criticize quite a lot. And even still, I think I forget a specific game to refer to, but I've known in the past where even when we've been leading and looking to defend the lead, Walcott tends to try and be the player that still remains on the halfway line to almost sort of secure the game beyond doubt, rather than attending to his defensive duties. So I think maybe there was also clear instruction on this occasion from Arsene to really help out Mathieu, and I think he did that very
actually
well.
It's interesting you say that. Now that you say it, there was a clip of Steve Bolt intensely talking to Walcott. And I was struck on a few occasions how deep Walcott sat while others went forward. So I think you're onto something there.
Indeed, they do tend to call me Sherlock Holmes around these parts.
Shirley is what they call you. Yeah, so it was a little bit anticlimactic once we got the goal. I don't know if it was the nature of the goal, but it almost felt like the air went out of the balloon, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Reading at that point
they were cooked.
They were completely exhausted and cooked, so they didn't really have much attacking impetus. And really, the strategy for them at that point was really to try and take it to penalties. And most of their chances in general, anything they were able to fashion out, tended to be on the counter attack. And I think we've become a side that is able to transition quite well. We're a lot more solid in the way in which we're able to play against teams that come at us, and we've clearly worked a lot over the season on the way in which we can then defend leads and sort of set up in the way in which teams tend to set up against us, and the way in which Reading did set up against us at Wembley. So in general, I think when we do adopt that tactic, we tend to be a team that's pretty difficult to break down as it is.
Yeah, I think that's right. I thought Coquelin was great. He had a couple of flubbed moments, which he mostly recovered, but and a dodgy pass again in midfield, which he recovered or helped recover. But I thought overall he was a huge difference maker, even though for much of the game it felt like it was Özil, Sanchez, and 9 other dudes until Giroud came on. I thought he was the other. Now, when I watched it second time, I spent a bit of time watching Santi. I thought Santi was really good doing what he does, playing it out from from midfield and up. I thought if you get a chance to watch it again, unless you caught it first time round, I thought Santi had a really good, quiet, kind of Ozil-like, keeping things, ticking it over, joining the dots. I thought Santi in particular impressed me that I hadn't noticed clearly the first time round. Now, that said, we got our victory. We're off to Wembley. History in the making. Cross our fingers. We're playing Villa. It'll be another tough game. They're actually pretty good against Liverpool, I thought. Deserved the win. The Tim Sherwood machine piles forward. I think glory is tantalizingly close. 2 FA Cups in a row, I don't think has been done. So, final thoughts before we wrap this puppy in bacon and toss it in the oven?
Well, I mean, obviously the most important aspect of the semi-final was getting to the final, and here we are. It really gives the season, or the end of the season, a distinct purpose, because even, God forbid, we don't win the final, we've still now got something to look forward to come the 30th of May. So all this, there's a lot of talk now amongst the fans whether, although a second place finish would be deemed as progress, like, what does it matter? Which I think is like a ludicrous discussion in itself. But even that aside, the ability to build up further form and continue playing the way in which we have been over the last sort of 8 games or so, and probably over a longer period than that, really, will all be sort of leading up towards the FA Cup final now. And I think I found it highly amusing that Sherwood's Villa were able to put away Liverpool today, especially given how much bloody talk there's been about Steven Gerrard's birthday on the final of the FA Cup, and how it's written in the stars and has been sort of destined since birth that Stevie G would finish his Liverpool career on his birthday and on such a note.
God, that would have been so horrible, having to listen to that shite for the next, till May 30th? God, Jesus Christ. And then if it actually came true, oh my God.
But really, especially given the form that they're in, Villa, I'm not actually sure if there was much difference between the two sides. It's not as if Liverpool have been particularly excellent, as we showed at the Emirates. So I think it's going to be a tricky game. This Villa side are a team with a lot of confidence. They've got a lot. That kind of setup, as we've talked about, is highly suited to the way that Villa play. They're a very good counter-attacking side. Benteke seems to have regained the form that he had from a season or so ago, and he's looking extremely dangerous. And they've got so much pace in the front three of theirs. They've got a defender of the ilk of Ron Vlaar, who was excellent in the World Cup, and they look like quite a solid team now. And I don't think the FA Cup final is going to be easy by any means. It's going to be a really, really tough game, as any of these sort of semi-finals and finals tend to be, no matter the opposition. So it's going to be an interesting one. I think we'll have a closer idea of the kind of team that will be available, and I think a lot of that may be dictated by the types of injuries that we may or may not suffer over the next 6 Premier League games. But for now, I think the importance will be looking ahead to this Chelsea game, seeing if we can maybe sort of lift this hoodoo over that Mourinho seems to have over Arsene. If we do get the win there, or if we do put in a strong performance and really and look like we should have come out with a victory at the very least, we'll certainly be sending some pretty strong signals going into next season. And I think if we can wrap up the season with an FA Cup, then all said and done, despite the very slow start that we've had, we did have in the opening parts of the season, I think it will, looking back on it, assuming, of course, that we're victorious on the final of the FA Cup, then we'll probably look back at this one as being another pretty successful season for us.
Sure. Well, speaking of strong performances, James, thank you very much for talking us through the semi today. so eloquently as always. You've got a flight to catch. So let's wrap this puppy in bacon and pop it in the oven.
Indeed.
It's around now. Elliot would say something eloquent, something funny, something self-deprecating. So just take that as read. This is the Arsenal Vision podcast. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and in particular, James, thanks for doing the job of 2 or 3 midfielders on our run through today.
Thanks, Paul. It's been a pleasure. I'll next time I chat to you, I'll be back in the UK. So all the best.
Great. Thanks, James. Thanks, everybody. So long.